Hello, awesome. Okay, so right now we're talking about lunar returns. And if you are familiar with the new moon that happens in the collective, then a lunar return is your new moon. Okay, so you have 13 of those throughout the year. And then you have a solar return every single year. And so the solar return, when we think of the sun, we think of it's conscious energy, right? We think of, in the way I describe this from a medical astrology standpoint, is the sun is your life force battery, right? When you wake up in the morning, it's how much energy you have to give throughout the day. Okay, it is your battery. It can be stored up, etc. Right? And so solar returns show us kind of the big moves that are going to be happening throughout the year, what you're going to be struggling with throughout the year, etc., etc. Now, the lunar energy from a medical astrology perspective is that it's the force that takes your battery power and diffuses it out. And so the story I always use is, if you have woken in the morning, you are having a great day, right? You've got plenty of energy, and then you stump your toe, you spill your coffee, you get in a traffic jam, you're depleted. And that's because the emotional struggle of having your day go wrong depletes that energy. You're spending energy to have those emotional reactions, right? Whereas steady, focused energy can last all day without these big emotional waves, right? And so, in that same way, the solar return chart, which happens once a year on your birthday, shows kind of what's the potentialities for the year for you. Whereas the lunar return chart kind of shows how that energy is being moved out every single month. So what your focus is from month to month to month. And it is your personal new moon. It's when your lunar energy is replenished. It's the best time for you to set intentions. It's the best time for you to sit in personal ceremony, do your tarot cards, absolutely do it the collective too, right? For sure. But your month, that the new moon is the collective's month. The lunar return is your cycle. It's your month. And where I differentiate this as well is that's where you're focusing your energy. That's like when you're setting an intention, that's where your energy is going to go through the month. But if you're a bleeding woman, your menstrual cycle is going to show your productivity. And the reason why I bring this up is because I see a lot of people, and I went through this, I personally went through this, where I would bleed on the full moon. And that's when everybody was like, you should have so much energy and you should be great and you should plan your activities. And that was my inward time. And I really struggled with that. And so now it's a matter of how I personally use it is I look at my lunar return to see and pay attention to what I'm going to be focusing on. So sometimes it's not related to business. Sometimes a fourth house lunar return, I know that I need to step into caretaking myself. It's basically this reminder to take these other things that we say need to be going all the time off the table and prioritize something. Now, for example, if it's a ninth house lunar return, I'm looking at, I keep bumping my mic, making identity shifts. We look at habits as sixth house. Okay. So habits is like you start doing something new. You're physically doing something new. And then ninth house is kind of when you've integrated that to the point that you're becoming a new person because of it. Okay. So like ninth house would be, or sixth house would be you start an exercise routine. Ninth house is getting to that point where you're like, oh, I'm a gym person. Right? It's that identity shift. There's a lot of belief system changes, and in that is identity shedding. So this normally, like a ninth house one, would include a lot of like, okay, there's things I've got to take off. There's things that I've got to change how I'm doing it. Or versus the opposite of that is there's new identities that need to be put on. Stepping into a new role officially. Okay, so work with the lunar return is simply paying attention. First off, marking that as the time for you to set intentions. And then also, if you can, start paying a little bit more attention to that that chart. Just simply knowing the day of your lunar return and knowing that's a time of replenishing your emotional energy for the month, it's setting the tone for your entire month. You know, for me, another thing that I'm a Leo moon, so I'm a lot emotionally. And I would have this tendency to burn up a lot of energy around my new moon or my lunar return, excuse me. And so as I got into the pattern of it, I realized that I needed to set aside that day to make sure that I had time to replenish me, that I wasn't utilizing it to help anyone else, or I wasn't utilizing it getting frustrated or taking on too much. So it's just a time in my calendar where that's for me. That's setting the tone for the rest of my month. So I'm going to get my head straight. I'm going to get my me time in and focus and set my intentions for the month. Okay. So how do you find out when your lunar return is and how you read it? Okay. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to use my favorite of favorites, AstroSeek. And if you're Googling it, you're just going to do AstroSeek Lunar Return. Okay. And then you're going to go to the lunar return calendar. You're going to put in your date of birth. I'm not going to put in mine. I'm just going to put in New York. Somebody born on the 1st January 1970. And then you can select the year, but generally speaking, you don't want to go too far ahead on these. And then the city that you're in for the, now you know where I live. Well, I don't actually live there, so it's fine. Okay, so let's say they're still in New York. Okay. All right. So we've calculated the dates of the return. This is, I can't point with my finger. This is all of the returns that somebody has for that any given year. So literally this is just marking this down in the calendar. Okay. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look at the birth chart times return chart, because some people only look at lunar return charts and see what house the moon is in for that month. But because I look at this way because Dorothy's taught me to look at this way, is because we're looking at it as the set of that month or roundabout month that you have that diffuses out your energy, right? So it becomes its own entity in that. So within that, you're going to be more emotional about a certain aspect of your chart, whatever house the moon is in. But the actual energy of the month is based in where the ascendant of the lunar return chart falls in your natal house. Okay. So before we look at anything, like, don't freak out. I know this is a lot. Okay. We can see here, we have the inner numbers right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. This first inner layer of planets and charts and houses, that is the natal chart. Okay. So if you just follow my line around the inside of the wheel, this is the natal chart. Okay. So this person natally has Libra on the ascendant. Okay. And we see that ascendant ASC. This is the natal chart in blue. The planets in blue are in the natal chart. Okay. On the outside wheel, we have the lunar return chart. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to look at when we find the lunar return chart, which is the orange outside wheel, is we're looking for ASC on the outside wheel, and see, we can see it right here in Leo. Okay. So this is the ascendant of the lunar return chart, and it falls, we just drag straight down to that gray inner wheel. It falls in the natal 10th house. You see where I'm getting this from? Because here's the ascendant. It is in the natal 10th house. So for this person, this would be a time in that month to put career goals at the top of the list. This is going, I'm wanting recognition. If this is somebody who's been wanting a promotion, been wanting to talk to their boss about certain things, been having some disgruntledness, especially with it being in Leo, you're wanting to have that recognition. So this is that person that month needs to focus on that. Okay. Now I'll quickly run through the houses. That's your main focus. That's the biggest thing. Once you have that down, you understand most of your lunar return chart. I'm not going to go into how to read a whole entire lunar return chart because we'd be here for at least an hour, maybe 2. And no. Okay. So once you figure that, again, you're just looking at the outside wheel, you're finding ASC, you're dragging down and seeing which of the number wedges, what house it falls in the natal chart. Okay. So if that ASC fell in the first house chart, this is focusing on making yourself new. This is really stepping into some new priorities that you've had, your physical body, dressing differently, showing up in the world differently, some personality changes. If you've been having some, how do I put it? If you've been having some issues lately in how you're showing up in the world, if you've been feeling like you've been more anxious, or you've been not necessarily communicating or expressing yourself in a way that you want to express yourself, or going after the desires that you want to go after, this is a time of figuring out why inside of you that is happening. Not why it's happening to somebody else or yada, yada, yada. This is taking full ownership of your own desires, your own path, and going, what can I change in me? Okay. Second house, this is all about valuing yourself. So a lot of times in this, it's not just about money, but conversations around money definitely can come up. I've had stuff around, for me in business, I've had stuff come up around pricing differently. Literally being told 3 times in 1 week, a certain phrase around pricing. Anyways, but it's your self-esteem, it's your self-confidence. When we talk about the second house, it's also the house of gifts that you come into the world with, right? It's your gifts. And not what makes you valuable, because you're infinitely worthy, but like, what makes you a value to society? What makes you valuable in a world as we currently know it, right? And then it's realizing that the outside world can only value you as much as you value yourself. So issues around that definitely come up with second house. It's a time to grow your confidence. It's time to, and you really want to pay attention every single time this comes up, is like, okay, something around value, self-esteem, self-confidence, and the things that I innately carry as gifts are coming up in the world. So I know this is a test to grow my opinion of myself, for example, or have my show up in a more confident way. Okay. If that ascendant on the outside wheel is in the third house, you're dealing, well, this can sometimes mean short trips, kind of take up the thing. I don't know if you're like me, but 1 week away at my mom's house, which is like 500 miles away, is like I lose an entire month. So it may actually be that, it may be a vacation, it may be a short trip. But it's also dealing with some basic mindset changes. This isn't, again, if we want to actually look at the wheel, the third house is when we start having that recognition of like, it's pattern recognition, right? It's that like, oh my gosh, I do that. What am I going to do? You're starting to look at quick fixes. You're starting to just recognize the pattern coming up. And a lot of times, especially because third house is like early childhood, we do see some early childhood, not trauma, but trauma come up. And so it's just a time of shifting that. And the best way to move through it is just being aware, because again, we see the third house is pattern awareness and mindset shifts. Sixth house is taking action on those mindset shifts. It's actually starting the habit that might repair that third house issue. And then ninth house is when we actually see that identity shift, when you actually become someone who doesn't struggle with that thing anymore. And it may take multiple journeys through that. If it's a big something, like if it's about earning money or business or weight loss or any of those things, it may take several cycles through that. So, but just being aware that that's what's coming up during that month is really helpful. Okay. Fourth house is our deep inner self, and it's also our home. Okay. So it's literally like our physical home, but it's also like our spiritual home, like your heart, you're the deepest part of yourself, right? The most vulnerable part of yourself, because fourth house is also like your end of life living, not your death. That's actually 11th house. Don't freak out. Okay. So it's the most vulnerable part of yourself, and the deepest part of yourself. So this is a time for me, especially when I have a fourth house lunar return, it's going deep tending, like cleaning my home, making sure that I'm not taking on too many things outside of my home that are going to press on me. There are certain people that I love dearly, but when I'm already raw, I don't want to spend time with them, right? So that's just kind of that permission slip. If that outer ascendant is in the 4th house of your natal chart, it's just this permission to kind of close down, tend, not close down, not dissociate, tend. Okay, so if it's in the 5th house, 5th house is our creativity, it's playfulness, it is the actual inner child. But a lot of times you'll see either a new relationship start during a 5th house lunar return. Don't worry, they may or may not stick around for long, because 5th house is dating. It's also gambling. So it's like a boyfriend and girlfriend kind of thing. Talking stage is 3rd house. Okay. 5th house is boyfriend, girlfriend. But you can have this kind of new fun romance kind of start, but a lot of times it's a creative project, whether that's you're making a baby, you're dealing with a baby you've already had. It's really focusing on the best way to move through it is through that playfulness. Because what can happen is that, like, say your kids during a 5th house lunar return require more of your energy. If you're trying to then treat it like a 10th house month, where you're trying to get that promotion or something along those lines, you're going to be so drained. You're going to be frustrated, right? So just being able to prioritize going like, oh, this is playfulness is awesome. Okay. 6th house is, sorry, we already talked about 6th house. I'm going way more in depth with this than I thought I would. Okay. So 6th house is, sorry, now I'm looking at my grandmother cutting up peonies. Anyways, okay, 6th house is, like we said, it's when you're making a habit shift. It's when you're starting to take action on a mindset shift. It's when you're going, I'm implementing a habit, I'm taking care of my health. Also in this is where you're showing up and you're actually spending a little bit more time being of service. So a lot of times this is kind of like the next level octave of, your job actually does need you more, or, whatever you do to help other people, they need you more. And so it's really just kind of stepping into that selfless service, in however you choose to show up to it. And that could be in your job, like in a business. This might be where you're really where you're really having to deal with a lot more admin tasks, things like that. And it's just kind of like, instead of pushing against it and resisting it, understand it's going to be a temporary thing. And just stepping into that devotional energy of like, oh, I'm doing this with love and care because I know how important it is for my grand scheme, right? And then also making those habits. It's also a time where you really want to have, if you are a routine person, which we can break down from a human design perspective, or which can be broken down from a human design perspective, is you want to be tending to those routines, okay? Or lack thereof, one of the two. Okay, so 7th house, this is relationships. This is a new partnership. This is marriage. This is dealing with your marriage more, whether positively or negatively impacted. But it's other people, and you really want to focus on the other people because they can bring in a lot of great opportunities into your life during that time, a lot of help, or you may actually be the one really helping other people. Okay, 8th house is you're dealing with, on one hand, this can sometimes be, don't ever be afraid of any astrological component. Okay. So 8th house can sometimes bring us these deeper experiences, ones that, are not complete quickly, because you're dealing with your subconscious in this. And on like the higher octave of it is you looking at your shadows and your subconscious things, and they're coming to the surface, or you're seeing them in other people and you're becoming aware of them. And that's awesome. And you take time to heal and shift and alchemize and go into the icky, sticky deep. And if you're not doing that during an 8th house lunar return or 8th house solar return year, is you're just sitting there going like, why is this happening? So you're really invited in this to step into the deeper story of why things are happening in your life, paying attention to signs, repeating patterns, symbolism. 9th house, we've already talked about. This is where you start making those identity shifts. You start making those belief shifts. This is a lot. This can be shedding away of previous ideologies, previous beliefs, previous places that you hung out or collaborated with people who shared the same ideas, and now maybe you've outgrown it. It's really just kind of a shedding period a lot of times. Well, simultaneously a shedding of those old identities and stepping into the next ones. Okay, 10th house we talked about, it is career, recognition, advancement in that capacity, taking on new projects where you are leading them, stepping into more visible, this is marketing, but stepping into a more visible role. 11th house is your hopes and dreams. Okay. It's also your community, but it's also hopes and dreams. So this is the time where you want to start looking about your bigger picture, make sure that your day-to-day is lining up with that bigger picture. Also stay attuned and definitely get out in your community more. Look for like-minded community, take on that, whether you're hosting or you're joining a like-minded community, make sure that you're out there both because you don't know who's going to be the connection that helps you. And then also you don't know when you're going to be the connection that helps someone else. Okay. You have no idea when you might be able to have something that somebody else has been looking for so long. And you have this one little piece of the puzzle and just at a random meetup, you change someone's life. And this isn't even not even a paid thing. So being out in your community, focusing on your bigger hopes and dreams, focusing on the long-term vision for your life. 12th house, which is the last one, is more about, first off, it's an isolation period. You're probably going to be a lot more withdrawn. And where the 8th house kind of allows you to be in the sticky and the muddy and the unconscious rising to the surface, you can see it a lot better than 12th house. 12th house either looks like sometimes it can just feel like you're confused because you're about to start something new. And so it's like you're doing a bunch of stuff behind the scenes. Another example of this is like, you might have a launch coming up next month and you're doing all the things to prepare for the launch, but you don't feel like being on social media. Or it might be like you're renovating your house and you're DIYing and like you don't want to be out with your friends during this time, right? You are kind of to yourself. And sometimes it even looks like you're not quite sure what comes next. And it's totally okay. Give yourself that permission to kind of step back. And then also in the 12th house is when we're looking at that as divine connection. It's the final piece of the puzzle, right? When we're looking at it from a cyclical process, 12th house is direct channeled connection to that which is greater than yourself. So while you're taking that time away, you also want to be taking time to prioritize that connection and making it real for you. Okay, that's it. It's a lot longer than I thought it would be. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this and definitely leave me any comments about what was most helpful or if you're excited to use this. And then also, if you have any astrology questions, human design questions, business questions as it relates to human design and gene keys and astrology, please hit me up or actually like more directly leave a comment. Yeah. All right. Bye guys.